Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a wrap-up vlog, but in name only. There's no vlogging other than what you're going to see me sit here and tell you about today, but this is day one of the Women in Translation Readathon. I did 3 Head Start days, and those went fabulously well, and so did the day one of the official Readathon. So it was a really hot day, 35 degrees out there, plus humidity, so more like 45. I didn't go outside until about 7:30 this evening and almost died walking 3 blocks to the supermarket and back, and have just now cooled down, although my face is still really red, enough to do a video for you. But other than that, I spent the entire day reading, so I had a fabulous day. It was almost too much reading, like without getting up and walking around. Like I found myself just walking around my apartment just to stretch my back, because, you know, if it had been a nicer day, I would have gone out and walked to a cafe or something. So I was pretty cooped up, but pretty much of a happy problem. So tonight I'm going to tell you my final thoughts on Yuko Tsushima's Territory of Light, which I finished last night. And otherwise, I'm going to read to you. It's going to be kind of a bedtime story kind of vlog wrap-up for day one of the Women in Translation Readathon. So if that's not your thing, you might want to turn it off after a few minutes. But let me just say that this was really, really great. I enjoyed it. It was a 4-star read, and I knocked a star off because there was, for my personal taste, there was way too many dreams. There was dreams in each and every chapter. And I hate dreams in literature. They should be banished as far as literature is a dream. Don't put a dream in a dream. And at first they were like short paragraph long dreams, but by the end they were getting to be half-page long dreams, and I hate that. So I punished her knocked off a star for that. And the pacing was a little bit off at times. There was a little bit too much mundane, and the emotional explosions were a little bit jarring at times, but really it was the dreams. I want to read so much more by Yuko Tsushima, and this was a really unsparing look at what it was like to be a single mother in 1970s Tokyo, and it was not pretty, and there were kindly people around her, like her mother, her boss, friends, neighbors from the daycare center, that said they felt bad for her and wanted to help, but nobody helped, really. Maybe her mother did a little bit, not much, according to the story. She was really on her own, and she went crazy. Who wouldn't? It's without the slightest bit of political anything in the story. It was a fiery feminist tale, and I really cared about her. She was weird, but her life situation made her weird. But she was a strange young woman, but she loved her daughter. And I guess I wasn't 100% satisfied by the ending, but in a way, its lack of, the fact that it didn't make any sense made perfect sense. So no, I didn't penalize her for that. It was the dreams, damn it. But no, I really recommend this highly to anybody who's interested in Japanese literature or women's literature or literature in translation. I was quite pleased with it. So now I'm just going to read to you, and that's really all I've got the brain power. Just walking 15 minutes there and 15 minutes back just about finished me off tonight. So because of that, I'm not going to type anything. The excerpts, a couple of the excerpts are long, and I just don't have the brain power to even type and put those up. So you're just going to have to watch me read. But I will just say that I started The End of Days by Jenny Erpenbeck today, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's heavy. It's really heavy from the very first paragraph, and all I'm going to read to you from this is the first 2 sentences. I'm doing this as a buddy read with Ange, and Ange, if you see this video before you get my Voxer message, I didn't quite get the first section read. I'm about 20 pages shy of getting that read. I read almost 40 pages today. I'll read it in the morning. But yeah, here are the first 2 sentences of the novel. The Lord gave and the Lord took away, her grandmother said to her at the edge of the grave. But that wasn't right, because the Lord had taken away much more than had been there to start with, and everything her child might have become was now lying there at the bottom of the pit, waiting to be covered up. And it goes from there. This is totally a Sean book. I love heavy, sad, heartbreaking fiction like this. So yeah, I really enjoy it. And this one is much lighter in tone, but I'm really enjoying it too. Alberta and Jacob by Cora Sandell, translated from Norwegian. I think it was published in 1926, and the translation's good. I will profile these two translators. I should have said this one is End of Days is translated by Susan Bernofsky, and I will profile her a little bit tomorrow. And this Cora Sandell one is translated from the Norwegian by Elizabeth Rokan, and I will talk about her tomorrow. But I think it's safe to say that wherever you are when you're watching this, it's too damned hot. So I'm going to read you a winter scene. It's the first scene where we meet the heroine, and her name is Alberta. And I couldn't tell from this scene, it wasn't until I got quite a few pages in that I could safely conclude that I think she's maybe in high school. But here is how we meet Alberta in the novel. This is a page and a bit. When Alberta woke up in the morning, she was always warm. It was the only time of day when she was not cold. Her limbs were snug and relaxed, physically at peace. Nothing could be better. She would lie full length, her legs straight out. The whole bed was warm, and her body felt as if it had uncurled, as if a shell surrounding it had been broken. She stretched herself, feeling agile and supple, able to treat her warmth lightly. Sometimes in her arrogance, she would stick one foot out into the cold, simply in order to feel it warming up again as soon as she drew it back. At night, she would lie huddled and trembling beneath the blanket for hours, chilled to the marrow. She made herself as small as she could, drawing her legs up under her and hugging herself. The cold would sit between her shoulder blades, gnawing like pain. She carried it in her body all day, and it accompanied her to bed. Her feet, like blocks of ice, seemed not to belong to her, and she became cramped and sore from her huddled position. After a while, she would fall into a kind of waking doze. Her body slept, ice cold, but numb and unfeeling. Up in her head, her brain sat spinning, engrossed in its own affairs. Time passed. Hours went by. Through a thin web of half-waking dreams, she would hear the church clock. Then, suddenly, the warmth would come. It came like fever. She stretched her legs, and it was release from an instrument of torture. She relaxed her muscles as if after vigorous effort. She lay intoxicated and drifted into sleep. When she woke, she listened. Something ought to happen. The church clock strike, Taylor Kvandal begin, the South Ford steamer ring its bell. She had to find out where she was in time, and how long she could stay comfortably in bed. But the South Ford steamer rang 3 times. The church clock had the annoying habit of striking only once, whether it was the first, second, or third quarter, and Taylor Kvandal was subject to his human nature. He was not absolutely punctual. There were even mornings when he failed her altogether. Eventually something happened on which she could rely. The stairs creaked beneath Jensine, who was going down them. Then she heard the door to the office and a distant rumbling of coal. Jensine was lighting the stoves, first in there and then in the dining room. Alberta thought about all the stoves that were lighted every morning. The red glow from a stove door, the crackle of fire, were they not symbols of life's happiness? Warmth was life. Cold was death. Alberta was a fire worshipper in the full, primitive sense of the word. Warmth made anything possible. Warmth and the cold gnawing in her back surrendered. Hands and feet came alive. She became more cheerful, more lively. Her limbs freed themselves from her body in unrestricted, beautiful movements. It was like putting on a well-fitting dress. She had a desire to talk and laugh, and a desire to sit still, busy with something. Her face was no longer blue. She was a new person. Well, I love that, and I love Alberta already. She comes from a very unhappy, tempestuous family, and she's like a fish out of water in her little, small Norwegian city in the 1920s, or maybe earlier. And she sneaks hot coffee from the stove whenever her parents or whoever's not around, but she always drinks it out of something disgusting like the dishpan basin or something, and she she slaps it back boiling hot and keeps a sugar cube in her mouth, and it all sounds fine except the disgusting containers that she's sneaking it down her throat out of. But anyway, fascinating, and really, really, it's kind of got a Anne of Green Gables vibe, but I think written for adults. So if I end up really loving this first in the trilogy, I will read the rest of them. And I'm aware that I haven't shared anything from this, and much of the writing here doesn't stand out as writing, but my favorite passage, and it's a long one, so it's probably going to take another 10 or 12 minutes for me to read it to you. But it's a set piece where I think the heroine of the novel, Gayati, is visiting some distant relatives, and it's her observations of these distant relatives in what is now Pakistan, and their large home with a bunch of extended relatives is a fascinating place to experience through the eyes of Gayati. And Gayati is a wonderful protagonist because she is so fiercely independent and obstreperous and hilarious in the way that she will just refuse to obey anyone and wants to chart her own path through life. Wonderful protagonist. So here she is at these relatives, and it doesn't matter who these relatives are, just see if you sink into this description as much as I do. This time she found her paternal family home very interesting. Courtyard upon courtyard, alcoves along the sides of the courtyards, arched doorways and octagonal pillars, and the so-called royal raised platform seat outside the main window of the house. A large inner courtyard was surrounded by tastefully arranged varieties of jasmine and canny. A sizable square in the southern corner of the courtyard had been planted with Mulsari, Queen of the Night, and weeping Nyctantes. All these features were fascinating and absorbing for her, as if they composed a Middle Eastern dream in which she had lost herself. They seldom visited this family home, and never stayed more than a few days. On earlier occasions she had been too young, and at a stage in her life when she was completely unaware, unable to reflect on things and form opinions about them. But this time she observed this home and its traditions very carefully and with great enthusiasm, as if she were visiting for the first time. There was a sense of a collective in the lifestyle of this home. The selfish god of individualism had not yet crossed its threshold. In a manner of speaking, Daddy Amma was the ruler and owner of the house. She would come and occupy her royal platform seat outside the window after she had finished her morning prayers. And sitting out there, she would say all the rest of her prayers and tell all her rosaries, running the entire household in between. I'm so used to covering up my reading face while I'm reading. It just occurred to me in the last few sentences I should be looking at the camera occasionally, because I never have to worry about that. Continuing on. Both her sons had settled in far-flung places, and her daughter was married to someone who lived quite far away too. Her widowed daughter-in-law also spent most of her time elsewhere, even though both her daughters stayed permanently with their grandmother. The rest of the house was occupied by distant maternal aunts by marriage and grandmothers. Various alcoves and courtyards were occupied variously by the grandmother from the village, by the aunt from the area of the red-colored well. The kinships with these occupants was so complex and so distant that some real experts found them hard to work out, let alone Gaiety. Perhaps that was the reason why it was considered objectionable in that household to try to trace a relationship to its last and finest detail. If she thought that someone was being too inquisitive and was asking too many questions about how people were related to her, Daddy Amma would respond in a very authoritative manner. "Well, as I said, Bibby, she is a relation. When someone is related to you, there are no whats and whys about it. You can't compare the bonds which even a drop of blood makes to what might be tons of friendship." The truth is, in that house, the maintenance of appearances and old obligations mattered even more than kinships and blood relationships. At the far end of the courtyard, there was a long veranda with a series of small alcoves opening onto it, which were full of women and children, who Daddy Amma said were the families of their age-old servants, and should be greeted each morning, just like all the other grandmothers and aunts who were kin. One of those alcoves housed an almost crazy old lady, who became suspicious and lost her temper with any or everyone at the slightest provocation. For instance, one day she decided that the young ladies of the family had rummaged through her bundle and had stolen and destroyed all her good luck charms. Then, again, another day, she alleged that someone had stolen the carefully preserved hair from her son's first shave, which she had always kept in a tiny box in her trunk. She wept the whole day over the mere suspicion, claiming that she had accepted her son's death. He belonged to God, and was only in her charge for a short time after all. But why should someone steal his hair, which he had left in her charge? Daddy Amma insisted that she ought to be greeted every morning. She was the youngest daughter-in-law of their grandfather's nanny. Second in the pecking order was the wife of Amami. Her husband was their grandfather's favorite attendant. She was not really crazy, but she was a firebrand. She was constantly on the lookout for little complaints against the girls or anyone else. She would tell Daddy Amma tales about any trifle she considered worthy of reporting. Then there was Gaitie's grandfather's Aya's middle daughter, Sarwari, with her 3 children. Now that she was a widow, she had become Daddy Amma's responsibility. It seemed as if the house had been overrun by older women. The younger contingent were negligible in numerical terms. The only children in the house were Gaitie's young cousins, Talit and Ismat, and Choti Nani's orphaned granddaughter, Kamni, besides Sarwari's 3 children. This was perhaps why the house was peaceful. Otherwise, there would have been unending clashes between the older and the younger generations. Ismat and Talit were so devoted to their grandmother that it never occurred to them to do anything which might go against her wishes. This house had an atmosphere of its own. Someone would be nursing her hip, and someone else would be complaining about a hiatus of flatulence. The politics of the household was not dissimilar. If the cream on Chachi Berry Begum's milk did not seem thick enough, she would moan to everyone. "Did you hear this, sister? Mahango's daughter-in-law is diluting the milk. There was the skimpiest membrane of cream on the milk today." The grandmother from the village would whine endlessly about Nasiban's inability to chop betel nuts properly. "God save us, they feel like rocks rolling around in your mouth." Whereas poor Nasiban genuinely believed that she had cut them as fine as grains of millet. That absurd assertion would turn her face red with anger. And Choti Nani would spend her entire day fuming about the fact that there were more people in the world whose work demonstrated a greater lack of correct manners than anything else. This house and everything about it was new and interesting for Gaiety. Maybe it was the informality and egalitarianism of this household which endeared it to her so much. Arjumand is Gaiti's twin sister. Arjumand was not very happy there. To her, the house felt strangely boxed in and close. But in spite of that, she had been kept amused because of Talit, Ismat, and Chachijan. She had stayed mostly in their rooms, but Gaiti wandered all over the house with such familiarity as if she had lived there all her life. Each brick and every stone of the house had a legend attached to it. Countless stories connected with her father, her uncle, her aunt, and her grandfather were scattered in every corner of the house. She took as much interest in the female relations who were guests and their numerous children who came to visit her grandmother as Daddy Amma herself. She would meet them with great warmth and enthusiasm, sit beside them, carefully memorize the exact nature of their relationship, and then treat even their children with gracious hospitality. And so the days were slipping by, one by one, in this interesting house. It was early one morning as Gaiti lay under the shade of the dense mulsari on a small charpoy, reading a newspaper, when someone knocked on the door and said, "May I come in?" She laughed to herself. This is a nice way of doing it. People who come here call out to announce themselves. And people who come to our house ring the bell. The voice sounded sweet, sensible, and familiar. "Yes, master, come in," Nasiban, who sat amongst the roots of the weeping nyctanthus tree, sang out cheerfully. Gaiti did not move, but just lay there, facing the other way. Then she saw a tall and dark-skinned boy, who held a few notebooks in his hand, going towards Daddy Amma. He looked so smart, she thought to herself, admiring his back. "Berry Begum wants you," Shagufa came and told her. She put down the newspaper and walked towards them, trying to cover up her short hair under her skimpy little scarf. As a set piece, I just love that, and that's a nice introduction. So if you enjoyed that, you might enjoy this book, which is out of print, but you can find affordable used copies on the internet. And I am now, 40% of the way through it, and really recommend it. I'm making good progress. I have another day tomorrow that will be heavy on reading, and then start my work week the day after, and I think I can get 7 books read in 10 days. Or is it 8 books? I can't remember. Is it 7 or 8? But anyway, I think I can do it, because I finished 1 and I've got 4, so that's 5. 7 books in 10 days. I think that was it. I can't remember. But anyway, I think I can do it, and it doesn't matter if I don't, because I'm just having such a lush time immersing myself in literature by women in translation. So thanks again to the organizers, Matthew Sharapa, Kendra Winchester, and Jennifer of Insert Literary Pun here, because this has been a wonderful experience for me so far. I mean, I'm starting my 4th day. You are starting your 1st day, so yeah, I'm having a grand old time. That's all I got. Thanks for watching.